And the idea that one could pick a different path of vocation or miss the opportunity to be truly happy, not good. This is a flaw in the design.
You wonderful human being, welcome back to the inner church, where I make the connection between what people say, do or have and their inner voice. Today I dive into a conversation between Andrew Huberman and Dr. Paul Conti, so let's go.
And so, but these narratives get so deeply embedded, and the idea that one could pick a different path of vocation or miss the opportunity to be truly happy at a deep level based on these narratives. I mean, on the one hand, it's obvious. On the other hand, you just go like, whoa, this is not good. This is a flaw in the design, right? And yet you're giving us a roadmap to understanding and to overcoming it.
Right. Let's say we take your examples and we look. They're great examples, and we look at them. Right. The person making fun of the code in third grade. Right. We're assuming it hasn't harmed you. It hasn't changed the course of your life. Right. What does it tell us? It shows that negative stimuli are very salient. Right. I'm sure you got a lot of compliments in third grade too. Right? But it's the negative that stands out, which just shows that there's a salience bias in us towards the negative. And that's probably about survival and threat sensing. Like in some ways, it makes sense around human survival, but it doesn't make sense around human trauma, right? So you had given the example of what gets communicated to the child when, say, mother says something negative about father when father's out of the room, father says something negative about mother when mother's out of the room, just to give an example, right? So children, because the complex cognitive mechanisms haven't been formed yet, right? Then the natural way that the brain functions is in a self-referential way, right? So the child generally doesn't have the capacity to say like, oh, mom and dad aren't really getting along well in this certain way. So when dad's not here, mom vents a little bit about something about him by saying, the child isn't thinking about that, right? Then what the child will often internalize is, okay, there's me and there's mom and dad, and mom says dad is bad and dad says mom is bad, and I must be bad too, right? Because in general, if your parents are bad, then the child takes that on themselves. Now, again, I'm giving a simple example, but I'm very much extrapolating it. I mean, imagine if that were very, very aggressive, where the mother, when this happens, right, just tells the child how awful the father is, and the father does the same. You know, someone's not going to come out the other side of that being like, you know what, maybe they're both awful, but I'm not. Like, that's not how that goes, right? So the lessons, the traumatic lessons of childhood get internalized, right? And they don't even always have a solution state. So you think of
Okay, let's first dive in internal narrative childhood from a psychological standpoint, because when we look at Erik Erikson, a famous 20th century psychologist known for his theory on psychosocial development, it's obvious there are huge connections between internal narratives and childhood experiences. Erikson proposed that our childhood is marked by a series of developmental stages, each characterized by a unique conflict that shapes our evolving narratives. These narratives, formed during our formative years, echo throughout our lives, influencing our self-perception and the way we interact with the world around us. A mindful introspection into these narratives can sometimes unveil patterns and beliefs rooted in childhood experiences. Recognizing and understanding these patterns allows for a reauthoring of these narratives, fostering personal growth and a deeper understanding of the self. And what Huberman and Paul talked about is basically the impact of mom and dad and our environment when growing up. Okay, now let's focus on the inner voice instead of all this complicated stuff. And also use the comments in the section below to share your experience with the inner voice to others. Of course, the inner voice and the narratives is the most important part in your life. And those narratives are formed and learned in your childhood. Because before you had words and a vocabulary, you didn't know things. So you just looked and you only had sensory input. And then your parents, teachers, or peers learned you the words, positive words, negative words, bad, good, and all those things. And you stored all those things in your brain. And then your inner voice emerged and is around 2 to 4 years old. When you see children using words to describe things, ba, mama, and all those things, those are the words. And then your inner voice is born. And after it is born, it splits into two different voices, the voice of insecurity and the voice of security. And when your mom talks bad about your dad, your voice of insecurity learns those words. And it can be that later on in life, those words you repeat to yourself or in situations with others. And yeah, there are many things you can do, trainings you can follow about how to identify what your inner voice is talking about. But the most important point in this part is the impact of your childhood and the narratives in your head. And the narratives are either told by your voice of security or your voice of insecurity. But it can be that in one story, for instance, your big childhood story, in one part your voice of security does the talking when you talk about sports and you are very good at sport. Then your voice of security does the talking. But for instance, if you are bullied at school, then your voice of insecurity does the talking. So it can depend on various situations and actions and all the things. But the most important part is your inner voice shapes your life. And Huberman was surprised about the impact that it can have. But of course, if your inner voice, the voice of insecurity, is the dominant one in a certain area of your life, of course, that has major impact in your life. But let's get back to the next part of this video.
Because I feel like it might be an exploration of this aggressive drive. And if someone's doing that, are they trying to like mask something else? And why do people react to these seemingly powerful people in this way?
These things happen in the world around us, right? They're independent of the spectrum of gender, the spectrum of intelligence, achievement, right? They're human problems. So a person you're describing, whether that person has character structure problems that are present with them across time, or whether they're in a certain place, you know, whether it's in life or today, like we don't know for sure what the underpinnings, but what you're describing is it's a presentation of narcissism. Right? And narcissism is rooted not in confidence, not in arrogance, right? It's rooted in vulnerability. It's rooted in, I don't feel good enough. And narcissism then engages with the world through the lens of envy. So no one else gets to have any time. No one else gets to say anything funny. No one else maybe gets to say anything at all, right? There's a dominance of the room, right? There's a dominance of the room that comes through an inability to tolerate the back and forth of human interactions, right? Human engagement, right? So then that person becomes very dominant. And why is that? Because when they tell a story and they get a laugh, or even if it's not that funny and it's the 15th story, but somebody smiles a little bit or nobody smiles, they can perceive inside that like, I just did that, I said that, and maybe somebody responded positively. I feel good about that. For a split second, now that's gone. And then the next thing comes and the next thing comes, because people who are coming at the world through the lens of narcissism, whether it's just in that particular event, right, or it's across life, right, are never satisfied. And nothing ever brings enough goodness. Nothing ever brings enough feeling of pleasure. So the person then wants more, and that's how the person dominates the room. Now that can be very seductive, right? Narcissistic people, not always, but are often very seductive because of that appearance of mastery, right? Of control. So that person did have, we could look at it in the short term and say, that person had mastery over the room, right? No one said anything for an hour but them, right? So they had mastery over the room. They had control over the room. But what they're doing is exerting over control, right? In the short, it's like, penny wise and pound foolish, right? Borrow $1 today to pay back 100 tomorrow, right?
Okay, let's first use a psychological lens to look at narcissism, destruction, and envy. Take, for example, Otto Kernberg, a 20th century psychoanalyst and a professor of psychiatry and significant figure in the field of object relationship theory. We can learn a lot about psychological constructs of narcissism, destruction, and envy. Kernberg pointed out that narcissism is not just an excessive love for oneself, but is deeply intertwined with destructive tendencies and envy. A narcissistic individual harboring a fragile sense of self often resorts to destructive behaviors as a defense against perceived threats to their grandiosity. This destruction is also closely linked with envy, where narcissistic individuals might attempt to depreciate and devalue the qualities and achievements they cannot possess. Understanding these complex interrelationships offers a lens to comprehend the profound psychological distress underlying narcissistic behaviors and highlights the pathways to therapeutic interventions. In the video, Paul talks about that narcissism is not rooted in confidence, not in arrogance. No, it's rooted in vulnerability. It's rooted in I don't feel good enough, and then such a person engages in the world through a lens of envy. Okay, now one final time, let's translate this complicated stuff to the inner voice. And also don't forget to use the comments to share how your inner voice controls your life. Okay, like with many things, we can all explain it by using the two inner voices. So a narcissistic person who wants to talk the whole time when he's in a room with people on a diner table, he has his voice of insecurity that does the talking in its head. And all the examples Paul gave is an expression of what the voice of insecurity is telling that person. That's why an insecure person sometimes has a strategy of presenting himself acting very secure. So it's not that the voice of security is then the dominant one. No, the voice of insecurity has many tricks up its sleeves to convince you that he is the right voice. It's like the same with the devil and God and the devil. The devil has many tricks. And one trick of the voice of insecurity, because the voice of insecurity wants to prevent the other voice of also have a loud volume and be in balance, is to act as if he is confident. And that's why you see in many famous people, celebrities and actors, that they are very insecure. But they have learned to act a certain way, to put on a role, a mask, a face. And that's the voice of insecurity who presents himself as very confident. But when you look closely and when you listen what the person is saying, and if the person is not willing to also give room to other people, then you can be for sure that's the voice of insecurity that does the talking. So some people demand all the intention in the room. And when you have a balanced inner voice, your inner voice spots that that's a person who is insecure. So also by understanding how your two inner voices work, and by watching these videos, you can learn to spot the inner voices in the other people. Is the inner voice of insecurity doing the talking, or the voice of security? Because the voice of security doesn't need the attention all the time. You feel confident about yourself. There is no need to look at how many likes your video has, how many views the video has. You only are concerned about giving to others. That's what they talked about in the previous part, about beyond oneself. If your inner voices are balanced, then You are not afraid to give things to others, to help others, to show others the way instead of leading from the front. So we already understand that the voice of insecurity can have a destructive impact in your life. But let's talk about envy. Envy, of course, is also tied to the voice of insecurity. You see it with children, spouses. Oh, he got a bigger present than me, so I get envy. And if your inner voices are balanced, you are happy that your brother got a bigger present than you. You're excited for that, and you can see it in people. If people are excited, if you are successful, that means their inner voices are in balance. But sometimes that's not the case. It can also be that the voice of insecurity is the dominant one, and that's why someone is excited, because then that voice also gets some attention, because some people act as if they are excited. But when you look into their eyes or you look at their real actions, you can see it's the voice of insecurity that's faking to be happy. And that's why this channel is called The Inner Church, and we put a lot of attention to looking at how the two inner voices shape your life. So thanks for watching, and until next time. In the meantime, listen to your inner voice and take control of your life. And let me know in the comments what videos you want me to make. Until next time.